Good afternoon. I'm Frank Reedy, representing the Strategic Studies Department here at JSOU. Today, we're pleased to present a conversation with a distinguished guest, including audience Q&A. This session is unclassified and will be recorded and posted to the JSOU network. Keep in mind that the views and opinions expressed by all participants do not necessarily reflect the views, policy, or opinion of the U.S. government, Department of Defense, or USSOCOM. If you have feedback or questions after this session, email thinkjsou@socom.mil as indicated on the slide. Today's session is led by Mr. Kerry Roberts, Outreach Faculty here at the Strategic Studies Department. He will introduce the program and our guest.
Hello, and good day to everyone. My name is Kerry Roberts, and I'm from the Strategic Studies Department at JSOU. I want to welcome everyone to this online interview of Think JSOU. Think JSOU is an ongoing series that explores research and publications of JSOU faculty, resident senior fellows, leading academics, and the wider SOF and international security community. The online collection includes interviews with authors and researchers and is intended to supplement publications, articles, and other active discussions. I encourage everyone to explore the complete Think JSOU collection by reviewing our online offerings on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the All Partner Access Network. If you have a question for our guests, please identify yourself and submit the question using the Q&A icon. Today, Dr. Peter Singer joins us to discuss his 2018 book co-authored with Emerson Brooking titled Like War, The Weaponization of Social Media. Like War was selected by the USSOCOM commander for the 2020 Commander's Reading List as part of the Big Data Cyberspace Collection. Dr. Singer is a strategist, defense analyst, and author of several books. He is currently with the New America Foundation, and his past work includes serving at the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Harvard University, and editor at Popular Science Magazine and the Brookings Institution. His nonfiction books include Wired for War and Cybersecurity and Cyberwar, and his work of fiction, Ghost Fleet. And in 2018, Like War, which explores how social media has changed war and politics. His next novel, Burn-In, a novel of the real robotic revolution, is scheduled for publication in May of this year. Dr. Singer, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me, and very much appreciate the opportunity to chat everyone, and also just want to applaud JSOU for moving to this more flexible format given everything that's going on all around us. So really do appreciate the opportunity to link with you today.
Well, you're very welcome, and it's an honor to have you. So to kind of prep the ground for our discussion, cyberspace is a new wide commons, and it's impacted every area of human society, commerce, and it particularly pertains to social media and its impact on modern warfare. So my first question for you today is, why did you choose to write this book, and why did you entitle it Like War?
Sure. So, we are very near an important anniversary of this space. We're just a little bit beyond the 50-year creation of the internet itself. Originally, a Pentagon network, ARPANET, designed to allow Pentagon-funded scientists to collaborate and share what was a scarce resource back then, computing time and computing power. And along the way, though, it went from being this space of communication, first between Pentagon-funded scientists, then the internet became a space for the rest of us to use to communicate. Then it became something more than that. It became a marketplace. And we see this with the rise of big businesses and the creation of billionaires, including the richest man in the world. But along the way, something else happened. Conflict actors began to use it. And conflict actors began to use it to not just try and go after networks, but it began to be a space of conflict itself, the back and forth. And so what Emerson and I did, we were struck by a couple of marker moments that at the time seemed quite strange and unprecedented and revolutionary, and now they seem almost normal. One, for example, was the change in US military policy to allow soldiers deployed to places like Afghanistan to use platforms like Facebook. And suddenly you had a connection between them and the home front like never before. A lot of the people listening here will remember that. You know, it shifts to people being able to see their kids' birthday parties, talk about homework that day. But it also led to the ability to see the other side. A member of the Taliban or a supporter of the Taliban could friend someone on the opposite side of the battlefield. Another example of these sort of strange moments was, some people will recall, a terror group took over a shopping mall in Kenya. And the government there followed the normal practice back then of trying to control communication, wouldn't let media in, etc. And the terror group then realized, hold it, that means we're the only source of information in the world about this. And they began to exchange on platforms like Twitter about what they were doing, and they controlled the narrative. Then they discovered something else. They didn't have to tell the truth. And so you had these things playing out, and it just struck us as something important. And so we began with a research project to explore how groups in war zones were using social media. If you go back 5 years, you see very quickly that we realized we didn't scope it large enough. Originally, we're looking at in Syria, in Iraq, but then you see the rise of a group like ISIS. And of course, now it's not just about war classically, it also moves into the realm of terrorism, and not just in Syria and Iraq, but then recruiting outwards. So then we said, okay, let's expand it to look at terrorism too. So we start looking in locales like Latin America. Well, very quickly you see again, you've got terrorism, but it's overlapped with criminality, drug cartel use. So then we started, okay, let's look at bad guy use of it. So we look at not just drug cartels, we look at street gangs in Chicago and LA. Well, then go back to looking at war zones. You're looking in Ukraine, and yes, you have Russian military use of it targeting Ukrainian soldiers, but you also have it targeting politics, not just Ukrainian politicians, but Ukrainian elections. But not just in Ukraine, they're going after Hungarian election, Polish election, Brexit, the US 2016 election. Then when we're looking at the tactics that are being used, they're not just happening in these operations. You're seeing, for example, what ISIS is doing is the same thing that, well, regular teenagers are doing. Or you see the same things that Russian information warriors are doing are what celebrities are doing. But hold it, we're now looking at politics. You have a celebrity run for president and win and become commander in chief. So essentially what we realized is that we had something larger going on here. And that's what we came up with, the concept of like war, this larger phenomena of the weaponization of social media.
So in essence, as you state in the other part of your book, virality outpaces facts or the truth. Trying to track down the truth is harder.
Well, so what we,
the virality.
Yeah, essentially the way to think about it is, so go back to concepts, the very definition of it. So if you think, say roughly about 15 years back, not just the US military and the special operations community, but business community writ large began to recognize and wrestle with the issues of cybersecurity and cyber war, the hacking of networks. Like war is its twin. It's the hacking of people on social networks by driving ideas viral through a mix of likes and shares and sometimes lies. And the parallels continue on. What happens on the network is not about just the network. It has a real world effect. So if you think in cybersecurity and cyber war, maybe it was revolutionary back in 2005, but now we accept it as totally common that someone may steal zeros and ones from a computer network, but they're doing it for its real world effect. It might be to steal a battle plan. It might be to steal a design of a jet fighter to build your own. Certain nations have done that. It might be to steal credit card information and turn that into real money. Same thing in like war. You're driving things viral, not for the pure virality of it, but for the impact, its ability to shape a election, to shape a sales of a business product, to shape the prospects of a terror group, to inspire someone to an act of terror, to make people more afraid of terror. And an example of that terror effect, not just how we see ISIS use this medium to convince over 30,000 people to join a group made up of those they'd never met before, but also it causes an effect. Polling shows that Americans were more afraid of terrorism in the wake of ISIS's original online campaign. It was called #AllEyesOnISIS. Polling showed that Americans were more afraid of that in 2014 than we were in the weeks after 9/11. Think about that for a minute. It goes back to what you were saying about virality. We were more afraid in the period that at that point, ISIS had not killed any members of US military, had only killed one US citizen, a journalist that they'd captured, had not carried out a spectacular attack. And yet Americans by polling were more afraid of terrorism than in the wake of over 3,000 Americans being killed. And of course that fear drove policy and strategy decisions. Another strange aspect, but again, strange only if we think about it as being new, but it's parallel to cybersecurity. In cybersecurity, we've grown comfortable with the idea that you can have wildly different actors use the same TTPs. So you can have a member of Cyber Command use the very same malware, this very same weapon system as a Russian cyber criminal. And I'm not making that up. Literally the same malware got out and they're using it now. And a group of teenage pranksters. They may have wildly different goals, but they're operating in the same space and they use the same TTPs. Same thing in this. In our research, we found, for example, ISIS members were copycatting celebrities like Taylor Swift, or the reverse was happening where fans of Lady Gaga were copycatting an operation that they had seen Russian military intelligence do. Wildly different goals, wildly different actors using the very same TTPs. Because again, when you think about it as a conflict space, it's not just about the back and forth, it's about that learning that happens from each groups. And the final aspect of like war that I think it's useful is to think about how there's rules of the game. In every domain of war, we very quickly see, certain rules, certain best practices evolve. And what was striking to us as we looked at, all of these different cases and spaces, is we kept seeing a set of rules fall out of it. And really very quickly, there's four. One is about the open source intelligence side of this, that you have the truth is out there. You are able to track and monitor like never before. The second is what we've seen with Russian information warfare, but it's also hit everything from politics to coronavirus discussion online. The truth can be buried underneath a sea of lies. The third is what you just brought up, that issue of virality, that virality reigns supreme, and sometimes virality can defeat even veracity when it comes to having an effect on the world. And then the final aspect, the final rule is in creating this effect on the real world, it's shaking up the art of the possible, and that we are seeing groups and individuals that would not have won at whatever their gain was, whether it was an election, whether it was terrorism, whether it was military operation or business marketing. Groups that would not have thrived, say 10 years ago, are not just thriving, but doing quite well. And then old guard ones that don't get like war are losing. And if you don't believe that, guess who the US president is?
In parallel. Okay.
That's not me dinging him. Donald Trump himself says, I believe the exact quote was, I would not be president without social media.
Yeah, I can easily see him saying that. Okay, so my next question is, in your introductory chapter, you state, and I quote, The internet, once a light and airy space of personal connection, has since morphed into the nervous system of modern commerce. And just as the internet has reshaped war, so war is now radically reshaping the internet. Could you expand on those two statements?
So I think what's important is to think about what is different about the internet and particularly the form now, the evolution to social media, and how it's different than other communication technologies. And it truly is a revolutionary technology. And let me be clear, I'm not using the Rumsfeld era revolutionary, oh, it solves all your problems. I mean more in the, it truly is disruptive, game-changing, producing new possibilities, but also new perils in question. So if you look at the overall history of communication technology, you had, it always came in one of two forms. It either linked two people up at a distance in a new and better way, the telegraph, the telephone, or it allowed one person to reach many in a new and better way, the printing press or television, broadcasting out. What social media did is for the very first time brought those two revolutions together. For the first time, you could broadcast, and for the very first time, you could broadcast to the entire world and simultaneously engage one-on-one. And that is the revolution. It's also why it's so beloved. One of the interesting sayings in the book that was said by three wildly different people. One's Donald Trump, who was a businessman turned celebrity turned commander-in-chief. The other was LeBron James, a teenager turned basketball player turned celebrity turned very successful businessman. And the third, some of the people listening right now may recall him, Junaid Hussain. Junaid Hussain was a teenager turned terrorist turned celebrity. These are three wildly different people, and yet they independently came to the conclusion that they love social media because the rough quote was, "It's like owning your own newspaper." Each one of them independently said that.
Wow.
Think about that what they mean. You out of everything going on in the world, you control what is the news, what is not the news, how you're going to cover it, how you're going to share it, etc. But again, going back to that notion of conflict, it changed everything from our interactions online, whether it is an election, whether it is a battle, like the beginning of the book is the Battle of Mosul, whether it is a terror attack, whether it is a new movie, whether it is what happened at a party, to what drug works or not on coronavirus. We just keep ending up dividing into sides, arguing about it, fighting about it. So it's changed kind of the feel of the internet, but it's beyond just the feel. It's the idea that it has a very real world effect. It's part of the multi-domains of operations, and that it can have a tangible tactical effect. It's part of the story of how ISIS, to go back to that example of Battle of Mosul, ISIS's invasion force is a little over 2,000 fairly lightly armed men, maxing out at heavy machine guns, light mortars, etc. They're taking on a defending force that official count 60,000, actual count really 20,000. There was a lot of ghost soldiers, but even 20,000, that's 10 times the number. They're also backed by the US military. The Iraqi military units are equipped with Abrams tanks, Black Hawk helicopters. And yet, because of ISIS's skillful use, not of merely the physical battlefield, but by driving information viral, particularly what the Iraqi soldiers are seeing on their own screens, it's part of how the Iraqi military collapses. So, again, you can see this effect, and, bottom line, it can have a tactical effect. it can also have a strategic effect. Think about national defense strategy. We have changed it in the most recent iteration to circle back to the issues of great power conflict and rivalry. And I know that's shaped everything from how the Navy writ large is thinking about its purchasing to what's being taught at JSOU, and how Special Operations is thinking about its role in a world of great power conflict as defined by the NDS. But let's unpack that for a little bit. One of the challenges, China, well, they very clearly have grown in economic power, military power. They've got more aircraft, more warships, etc. The other one, Russia, are we really afraid of their one junky old aircraft carrier that actually, using social media, I can document how it not only catches fire all the time, but it actually sank while it was in dry dock? Is it Russia's conventional military strength that has made it a new great power challenge? Or is it its ability to operate in this space, not merely the cybersecurity theft of information side, but the like war, information operation side? That's where it's given its strategic effect. In fact, in some ways, it's given it greater strategic effect than even the Soviet Union was able to pull off. Think about NATO, now celebrating an important anniversary. Is NATO threatened by new Russian tanks, or is it more threatened by the fact that through this space, Russia has been able to shape elections, Hungary, Poland, Brexit? Roughly, one study found that 1/3 of the online conversation related to Brexit was actually from inauthentic sources, fueling the rise of far-right groups that are making gains everywhere from Italy to Austria to Germany and the United States. And the result is that NATO is questioning its own role, its own value, in a way that it never did. So that's going back to your question, that's the effect of this space. It can be very powerful and cheap. To put numbers on it, Russia's operation targeting the 2016 US election, which, for example, 1/3 of, I'm sorry, on, I'll give you a different number. 146 million Americans unknowingly were exposed to Russian propaganda via their Facebook accounts in the final months of the 2016 election. That's roughly half the US population. Oh. To achieve that, Russia's entire campaign cost, one document was under 12 million US dollars.
Wow, what a return on investment for $12 million. That's
yeah,
incredible.
and an important thing to add in this, the power of like war, is that it doesn't just shape what people see online and therefore what they talk about online and what they think. It also shapes other media. Social media is the opposite of Vegas. What happens there does not stay there. And a great example of this is a study found that over 90% of professional journalists, you're a newspaper reporter, you book guests for a cable news show to a local radio talk show, anyone working in media, over 90% of them report that they use what's happening on social media to determine what stories to cover or not, who to interview for it, what angle to take on it, and if it's still trending, whether to double down with another newspaper article, with another segment on that cable news program, you name it. And so if you can hack that space, you can hack newspaper, radio, TV. as you and I are talking about it right now, we're seeing a phenomenal example of it in terms of these protests by a very small number of people popping up at various locations. There was one, for very sadly and amusingly, in Huntington Beach, where they were I'm an American. I don't like staying at home, and I want to be able. And they were protesting in front of a Baskin Robbins, which they really wanted their flavors of ice cream as opposed to keeping the rest of us safe. But the point is that they backtracked and did a documentation online, and a couple of things. The first is it was an AstroTurf movement. It was not truly grassroots. It was actually funded and originally pushed through a network of Facebook accounts. Then the very small number of people that showed up, sub 100, were actually covered in, they go viral online because they've got preset hashtags. They're then covered in pretty much, they don't just crack the online world, they are covered on TV, radio, etc., which then has people talking about it, debating about it, other people saying maybe I ought to join it too. An inorganic movement that sparked. And the Russians have pulled this kind of stuff before, and it's a final thing in terms of kind of the lessons learned. Things that, just like how the Spanish Civil War was a test ground for what happened in World War II, same thing in this space. What worked in 2016, 2017, then other groups copycat it and say, I can apply it to my own task.
Wow. Okay, so we're going to go to one of our questions of our audience. One of our JSOU faculty would like to ask this question: what does the explosion of misinformation and disinformation believability over the past 10 years say about the American psyche?
Ooh, wow. So the first is to note that there's nothing inherently American about like war in terms of being targeted by it. We, to go back to those examples that I talked about, we, saw Russia conduct it against Ukraine. We saw ISIS conducted against Iraqi military. We, in the book, we talk about Taylor Swift conducting it against teenagers to win their hearts and minds and have a real world effect, which is for them to buy her albums. And she's very successful. She becomes the richest self-made woman under the age of 40 by mastering this game. I jokingly call her the Marie von Clausewitz of like war, which is to also give added credit to Marie, because she's the one who really wrote it, not Carl, who had died by that point. So there's nothing uniquely American about being targeted by it. There is, however, something that question really hits at, which is this sad, strange, and frustrating irony that the United States was the nation that literally invented the internet, and yet we are now the nation that other nations point to of don't let what happened to them happen to us. And I mean that specifically. Swedish defense planners literally used the US as the model of exactly what not to do. Other nations, Canadians, etc., Australians. And I think there's several phenomena. I don't know if it's the psyche. It's everything from we are, like a number of democracies, incredibly open. But we also have very different attitudes and, as a result, laws towards things, for example, like election campaign laws. Our election campaign laws are very different than most other democracies. And in some ways that enshrine freedom of speech, and in other ways that allow things to happen that frankly, we all find frustrating, the role of money and politics of the like. Relevant to like war, our campaign ad laws have not been updated since roughly 2005. And so it creates a basically this open space to drive a Mack truck through if you want to try and poison an election. Another challenge is because we're a democracy but not a parliamentary system, we have a hyper-partisanship that's gotten worse and worse in recent years. And we've also had, because of that, a breakdown of the power of political parties. You have a phenomena where, you know, someone who was had only recently registered as a Republican wins the Republican nomination. Similarly, on the Democrat side, someone who was had not been registered as a Democrat comes in a very close number 2 to the Democrat nomination. These are things that are kind of very specific to America, and they create more of an opening. But then the final problem that we have is our attitude that things that happen to others can't happen to us because we're a superpower, we're dominant. And one of the biggest lessons learned that the Estonian ambassador shared on this, Estonia is an example of, as opposed to the US, of how not to do it, they're an example of how to do it. And I love that because there's no compromise of freedom of speech. There's no compromise of their economy. Their economy is actually better than ours, more digitized. They run elections well, et cetera. So you don't have to give up rights. The Estonian ambassador, they talked about, you know, everything from how they build it into their defense strategy to how they've changed education in their schools. But most of all, he said, we're not afraid to talk about it. That is, and this is relevant to public health right now, the toughest diseases to deal with are the ones that people are in denial about. We saw that with AIDS. We see that with men and colon cancer. We've tragically seen that with coronavirus. The democracies that dealt best with it and had the death toll in hundreds as opposed to US tens of thousands were the ones that didn't deny it. They didn't downplay it. And it's the same thing with disinformation. The Estonians are willing to talk about it openly. And yet we don't have that in our ecosystem right now. Think about how if 146 million Americans, it's half the US population, were exposed to Russian propaganda in 2016. And that's not my numbers, that's Facebook's own numbers. How many people have said, whether it's your friends, your family, senators, presidents, how many people have said, hey, I was exposed to this, I shared it, and here's what I'm doing so that it doesn't happen again, so that I'm not taken in again, or I don't take in my friends and family, so I don't do it again. How many people have actually done that? As long as we are in denial, we will continue to get our butts kicked in like war with real consequence on everything from the level of extremism and terrorism and the deaths that result from that to its effect on our democracy.
Okay, so I have another question from another faculty member at JSOU, and he asks, how does the US get past its bureaucratic processes coordination to compete on social media with its adversaries? Is it even possible? And should we just try, or should we just accept the fact that the US can't win the narrative battles?
Oh, great question. And it also points to a member of the special operations community. We quote them in the book. I think they were a major, don't hold me to that, but basically they talked about how going into any campaign, any operation, they assumed that we would lose the battle of the narrative. Think about that for a minute. A member of the US military saying, I'm going into something and I assume that I'm going to lose this critical part of it. And maybe even the part that's the most critical. General McChrystal has described that this is the most important, domain, that you can win in the physical, but if you lose in this part, it won't matter. So that's striking when we think about that we're assuming that we lose. Okay, so what do we do about it? We deep dive this in the book and various writing, but like so much else, you can break it down from overall strategic level down to process and organization. Strategic level, The United States does not have a strategy for this. We have, if you read, we have a pretty good cybersecurity strategy. It was issued a little over a year back. What's notable about it, sort of escape notice, is the wording of it was, much of it could have been issued by the Obama administration. In fact, some of the text originally was. It's a strategy most professionals would, in cybersecurity, would say this is a pretty good strategy document, except it does not have a single word about everything that we've just talked about in terms of information warfare, like war and the like. It's completely focused on classic cybersecurity, protecting critical infrastructure and the like. So without an overall strategy, as anyone attending JSOU could then quickly write a paper on, you then get a lot of ad hocery. It doesn't mean we don't have things going on related to, we've got a lot going on, but it's not brought together. It's not unified. It's in terms of, relating to each other. It's funded in very different ways. So the result is you have things like, for example, the Russia Working Group, which brought together members of the intelligence community and Homeland Security, FBI, and they focused on Russia targeting elections. It didn't work, and it wasn't existent in 2016. It's now existent now. Good program, but go back to what we're talking about. Russia elections. Okay, well, what about something that's non-election related, or something that is not a actor like Russia, but it's a network of non-state actors? Or a different example of when you don't have a strategy, you can't figure out who's in control of it. There is literally a bit of a turf war going on right now between everyone from cyber command to special operations. And then in these, is it an issue for the PSYOPs people? Is it an issue for the public affairs people? Everyone's wrestling. So, okay, who's in charge of it? Another example is, a good strategy, is people in JSOU would learn, is whole of government. So we've talked about how we have elements working on this in NSA and special operations. Okay, where's State Department? Utterly absent without leave on this. Since the US was attacked in this, and not just Peter Singer saying it, as you and I are talking literally today, bipartisan report came out from Senate Intelligence Committee, both Republicans and Democrat senators sign on. It documents all of the different things that Russia did to US in the 2016 election. Since that point in time, over 30 other democracies have been hit by this similar activity. So has State Department brought together all of these democracies so that we, for example, have framed it, instead of everyone bilateral, an attack on one of us is an attack on all, building a deterrence framework? Or a different example, how have we changed professional military education? We're having a great exchange right now, but everything from, much like we did in cybersecurity over the last 15 years, how we changed our coursework, to personal practices. I do a lot of engagement with senior leader training courses, for like the new flag officers. None of them are taught, not just the big like war stuff, but how do they personally use social media? What are the best practices? What are the things that they ought not to do at that personal level with their personal accounts? So these are all these different layers of how we need to go after it. And again, I think of this parallel to cybersecurity. No one would say, here's the one thing we ought to do about cybersecurity. We would talk about everything from strategy to cyber command to what we just did to better secure the exchange that we have. The first version of Zoom, no one was putting passwords on it, and we saw people get into them and do bad things.
Right.
So it's everything from personal practice up to the strategic level.
Yeah, and this is of particular importance to SOCOM, because SOCOM is a coordinating authority for MISO, Military Information Support Operations, which I think is the genesis of why the professor asked that question. So my next question is, you talk about how the rise of the internet is similar to the change ushered in by the telegraph, the telephone, radio, the television, but that the internet has, quote, left its adolescence and is a global revolution. So could you just expound on that statement?
It's interesting because you can think about the parallel, and anyone who's a parent will sort of feel this, right? So adolescence is this period where once the innocent, lovable kid began to develop physically, hit that, they begin to get the body of an adult. They begin to get the power of an adult. They're, however, ungainly. They also have to wrestle, given that power, with the responsibility of an adult. And frankly, they start to kind of flail at it as well. And you can think about the parallels for the internet writ large, this once innocent, lovable place, to incredibly powerful, to, is it maybe a little bit too powerful, to hold it now, it took the car and drove, it wrecked the car. It wasn't just now it was able to drive, it wrecked the car or whatever. You can think about that level to also the powerful people who control the internet. The evolution of a Mark Zuckerberg, who went from, literally and this is 15 years ago on that adolescent stage. We're a little bit, several months after the 15-year anniversary of what is originally called Face Mash. It's Mark Zuckerberg in his dorm room at Harvard writing software that's originally designed to allow people to rate which of the members of their dormitory are hot or not. That's the origin of all this. And he later has to apologize in the Harvard Crimson student newspaper for, kind of how offensive the idea is. But 15 years, it then goes from Face Mash to the Facebook, to, of course, the broader Facebook empire of everything from Instagram and the like. And along the way, this ungainly kid becomes not just a billionaire, he becomes one of the most powerful people, not just in politics, but in everything from warfare to public health. If he changes his mind, it affects everything from whether a genocide can be organized, coordinated, and motivated, to use the specific example of the mass killings in Myanmar that went after over 700,000 people, or public health. They go from, the platform companies go from saying, you know what, anything and everything is allowed online, including if you want to claim falsely that we have the anti-vaxxer conspiracy theory, which, going back to your discussion about virality and veracity, we see childhood diseases like chickenpox, measles on the decline, and then social media comes along and they all spike. And it's not because the disease grew more viral, it's because anti-vaxxer conspiracy theory spreads. To coronavirus, they go from anything goes to platform companies are, for example, have censored, when people have posted falsehoods about certain medical treatments, it's been taken offline, to upper ranking better data on treatment, to literally tracking of outbreaks. So there's this kind of sense of adolescence and coming out of that adolescence, what it means to have the power of an adult, but also kind of that ungainly transition. And everything we just talked about also applies to our politics and how we adjust to it. So think about the discourse over, going back to the idea of the power of the companies. That was not a debate issue in politics in 2016. You can rest assured in 2020, but every future election for the time being, you'll have some kind of discourse around the power of these companies and should they be broken up or not. And it's not a right-left discourse. We're seeing people on both the right and left, for example, Elizabeth Warren and Ted Cruz, who are two senators that don't agree on a lot,
we've seen them exchange about this topic. So it's just a parallel, I think, that might be useful for people.
Okay, so we're going to go back to our audience for another question here. So in chapter 6, you discuss factors to win the net. These include narrative, emotion, authenticity, community, and inundation. So he asks, since the book was written in 2018, have you noticed that one or more of these factors has become more important to winning the net than the others?
Oh, wow. First, insane compliments and thanks. It's by referencing those 5, it's very clearly someone who actually read the book. And for those that haven't had a chance yet, that section essentially really, it breaks down what we found. So if we've talked about virality being so important, we also found something else, is that in examples that range from bad stuff like ISIS propaganda to good stuff like Ice Bucket Challenge, when something went viral, it had these attributes. And that section found that there was these 5 attributes that kept coming up again and again. And from a lessons learned, it also means, and back to a prior question, if you're seeking to battle in this space, if you're in Special Operations Command and saying, okay, I want to push something out, but I want it to have effect, it's not just it needs to have these attributes on top of it. You need to think, okay, how am I, where's the narrative aspect of it, or where's the community aspect of it, where's the inundation aspect of it. It's like any other weapon system. You can tailor it, you can make it more effective. So to the question, have we seen one matter more than others? Oh, wow. Honestly, I've not seen that, because every example that sort of pops to mind, I can think of it. I think what I will say is the secret is out because of this space and everyone engaging and learning. We're seeing more and more campaigns that are specifically tailored and have most or all of these attributes working at once. And that's because not just the lessons learned by the groups themselves, but also how there is an industry building around this. And this is, again, you can think about the parallels of cybersecurity and cyber war, or I did a previous book called Corporate Warriors that was on the private military industry. We are seeing the black waters of like war. We are seeing contract actors that also learn these best practices and sell them to other actors. So, and the other actors might be another company, it might be another nation state, whatever. And so that's why you're seeing more and more of these tailored campaigns that are out there. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. So you lay out a variety of ways that social media has created a new environment for conflict. Who sets the rules for conflict in this domain, social media?
That goes back to these powers behind the throne, so to speak. There's the rules in terms of how we think of the modes of conflict and the like, and those are set by the actors exchanging back and forth. If we think about the rules of if you said the rules of air war or whatever, we're really talking about like the best practices. Then there's the rules in terms of what is allowed or not, sort of akin to the laws. And in that is, for the most part in the US, going back to where are we unique, for the most part we defer to the platform companies, and that gives them an incredible amount of power. And going back to that notion of adolescence, they have that power, but they're very uncomfortable with that power. We're uncomfortable with them having that power. You could see this play out in Zuckerberg's testimony to Congress. Everyone in that room felt uncomfortable about it, about the whole situation.
So that is, and again, it's an incredible amount of power, but we need to remember that at the end of the day, these are companies. And so their choices will be defined on something. Sometimes people in the US military will be like, why don't they do X? What are they not good at? They're companies. They operate like companies are designed to. They're profit-seeking entities. They will change their behavior either when they see something that is going to cause them to have less profit, and it might be because it doesn't work anymore. It might be because of some membership of their customer base says, I don't like this, change it. Or they change because of law. And it might be they change because of actual written law or the fear that there might be written law. And this is something, again, a parallel to cybersecurity. One of the things that in the US we do is that we very often threaten the companies. If you don't do X, we're going to create a law about it. And they say, okay, we'll do X. That has been the story in this space from the very start. Originally, everything went. And then the first intervention by the companies to set the laws of it was to ban something that most everybody agreed was a bad thing, child porn. And it was driven by both the customer saying, no, I don't want my ads appearing along this awful stuff, or I don't want to be in a space where this awful stuff is happening. And so they go with what the bulk of the customers want. And it's also the fear from Congress saying, if you don't clean this up, we're going to intervene. There's literally hearings on that. And we see that thread running from whether it's child porn to the early beheading videos post 9/11 to how they've acted relative to things like coronavirus. But there's that unease with that power. And a great example of it relative to coronavirus was we had politicians pushing treatments that did not work and were actually dangerous. It was not just misinformation, it was dangerous misinformation. Wow. And the platform companies, when they had originally set the law, said the rules of their space said, this is something that we will not allow. And so then they had a problem of implementation. When certain individuals that were not in politics posted this stuff, they said, can't do that, knocking that stuff offline. What happened when it reached the level of a head of state? And what they did, it was interesting, is when the Brazilian president did it, they knocked that post offline. When the US president's lawyer did it, Rudy Giuliani, they knocked it offline. When the US president did it, they didn't, because now they're going, oh my goodness, I don't want to be in this position. Yes, there was a violation of our rules, but, and oh, by the way, go back to the profit seeking. The violation came from our most valuable customer by number of follows. So that gives that kind of power in the US. It's very different if you're talking about the situation in a democracy like France, or a authoritarian regime like Russia or China. And those, the companies don't set the rules as much as the government does. In France, for example, you have most of the same level of freedom of speech here, but for example, if you post a falsehood denying the Holocaust, that violates not Twitter law, that violates the actual law. And the company will face a fine if it doesn't take it down within a period of time. In China, it's not deferred to the company to police that way. The government has its own censorship systems.
Okay, so we're going to take one more question from our audience. And he asks, how do we prepare young officers entering the military, and specifically SOCOM, to operate smoothly and competently in this domain? What's your recommendations?
Long run, I hope young officers at some point, even before they join, will be getting coursework in digital literacy. This basically is the idea that from grade school on up, we are taught regular hygiene. We are not taught well how to navigate the online world. And digital literacy is not just about what not to click. It's also about learning to discern and behave in this space. So in an ideal world, it doesn't wait until you get into this space. Okay, once you get into, once you are serving, once you are in this community, my hope is that it is built into professional military education. And I know JSOU is wrestling with that, but not just overall courses, but how it's taught in much the same way that people learn good cybersecurity behavior, even if they're not within cyber command, because it's a related domain of war. Not just how they personally behave, but how it's a toolkit. It's an equivalent of a fires that we need to be able to bring down. It can't be, I hope this is blended into war gaming. It can't be, here's our operational plan, now go off and layer on the info war top of it. No, it's part of the domain. It needs to be part of the training. We actually end the book with a look at how this has been blended into training sites like Fort Polk. And I know there's been some exploration in SOCOM and looking at how these kind of synthetic training environments can be useful. But there's also, going back to when I talked about those flag officer, I think this applies to the individual leaders, not just what you do while you're in uniform deployed, but how you operate in your personal conduct and behavior. And so I did a article, it's out on task and purpose, and it's my attempt to share the 7 pillars of personal social media use for military leaders. And it hits everything from the questions of whether someone should be online or not to best practices of it. And, you know, I'm not going to recount them all here, but I think a big key, I do think people ought to be in this space because it's the operational environment. It's also where much of professional development and debate is happening right now. If you wait for the journal to arrive in the mail, as opposed to reading the debates on Mill Twitter, you're going to be months out of date on everything from, you know, what people are talking about doctrine to what they think about new uniforms. It's where professional development and debate is happening, but it's also where communication happens. And a way of thinking of it is leaders don't lurk. If this is where the audience that you care about is, whether it's your fellow soldiers to the broader populace, this is where you need to engage. However, the final lesson of it is that we already have enough internet trolls. We don't need more of them in uniform. And there are, going back to the prior question, there's rules of conduct. There's legal rules of conduct and operational security issues of what can and cannot be shared online. But there's also just rules of conduct of how to behave in an appropriate manner online. And unfortunately, we see a lot of people going against that. But we need to remember those in uniform are a unique and special profession. And so with that comes a very different kind of power and responsibility. And that also applies online. So I hope that article will be useful. It's on task and purpose. Just, you know, Google my name and 7 lessons like war, and it should pop up.
Okay, we'll be sure to look into that.
I very much appreciate the opportunity to join you all. And hopefully the books that we talked about will be an added resource for people. One on this space is called Like War. And the other one that's upcoming hits, I think, a topic that's of top of mind for a lot of people. It's called Burn In. And essentially, it is a follow-up to a book a book that came out a couple of years that August Cole and I did called Ghost Fleet. Burn In is a combination of a novel and nonfiction research that is, it's a techno thriller. It follows a hunt for a terrorist in the future. So hopefully exciting and engaging, but it actually has over 300 footnotes documenting
how what's happening in the story is actually all drawn from real world research. And so along the way of hopefully enjoying the read, you learn about things like, okay, how does AI actually work? Or what are the ways that terrorists might operate soon? I'm a parent. I think of it as sneaking the veggies into the smoothie. And hopefully it'll be a useful tool for a lot of people. You can check it out online. It's the website for the book is burninbook.com, but you can also get it on all the platforms that you can buy books at. So hopefully people will enjoy it, but also importantly, find it useful. And thanks again for everybody joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Singer. I guess Kerry did freeze up. Appreciate all the insights, and not only can you get the books at your favorite online bookstore, but let's not forget during the virus suppression period that they're available from the JSOU library in physical form or in ebook form. Thank you all for joining, and please look for future engagements through announcements on JSOU social media or our other network. Thank you, sir.
Take care all.